Today we have the Ronald Burns, Mr. Hotty Toddy himself, as John would say, joining us to talk about SCA and barbecue and all the seasonings they have out. How you doing today, man?
Man, I'm doing good, guys. Certainly an honor and a privilege to be talking with you tonight. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Me too. I got to say, so I'm going to start out here. Watch John Lindsay's masterclass, right, on the barbecue champs. And he does this little backyard steak, right? And he throws this, because he just kind of mentions Hotty Toddy. And I was thinking, I'm going to grab myself some of that. And I was like one of the first ones to buy that. So I was like the next day or whenever I could, I had it in my house. And so this, I'm not someone who keeps everything tight to the vest, And so I bring it to a competition here in Utah and I'm using it. And we did well, 4th place out of 70 teams or something, like 40 something.
Yeah, 40. Don't give yourself too much props there.
Well, there was 70 something teams there.
Yeah.
It's going to be 80 next time I tell the story.
Okay.
So.
All right. It's like a fish story.
I couldn't help myself because I loved it so much. And I know I love a rub when I put it in my hand and just eat it. And I have to keep it off the counter, the kitchen counter. So I'm having everyone, hey, man, you got to try this stuff. Try this. You got to try this. You got to try this. I was like, oh, my gosh. Now here in Utah, everyone's using Hotty Toddy. And I'm not saying it's me. It's not. It's just how good that freaking rub is. Tell us about how did Hotty Toddy come about?
Right.
Guys, I'm from Mississippi. I'm an Ole Miss fan. And we, back years ago when we, my sons and I and a friend of ours were going to put together a barbecue team, we were trying to come up with names and we just came up with a Hotty Toddy barbecue crew. And we don't use the double D in Toddy. We use the T's, and which kind of separates us from anything that's associated with that. And it just kind of stuck from there. We started just doing some backyard competitions, and then decided that we wanted to move up, and we moved up to the pro division because we wanted to cook something besides ribs and chicken. And first couple of competitions, we started getting walks and ribs and pork, and always brisket and chicken was always our Achilles heel. But we practiced and practiced and practiced, and finally started getting calls, and we've won numerous grand champions. We've walked in every category. First place, all the way. And we were invited to the Jack, which was a great experience. We were invited to the Royal, which was a great experience. We walked the stage at the Jack. The Royal was another subject that was a totally something we hadn't expected with so many people and so forth, so on. So, we did that for, I guess, 10 years. And I cooked my first SCA contest in 2017, and to be honest with you, I was really on the fence because I was like, these guys were saying, "Come on, man, you need to come over here and cook steak," and I'm like, "Nah, I'm a barbecue cook. I cook steaks at home, And finally, a friend of mine talked us into coming over and cooking one, and we did. And I was like, "Wow!" We came over here this morning, popped a tent up, cooked 2 steaks, and went through awards, and we're back home before midnight. Hey, this could be something really fun. I finished out the year of 17 cooking, barbecue, and cooked, I think, 1 or 2 more steaks, and then we started cooking more steaks in 2019. Then last year, our crew, which consists of me and my wife, Melissa, our 2 sons, Bo and Clint, and some friends of ours that make up our crew. And last year in SCA, I cooked 60 SCA events. My wife cooked about 39 or 40, I guess. So we did a lot of running around toward the last 4 or 5 months of last year. I was in and around the top 10 in points for most of the last part of the year. I ended up 14th in the SCA points chase. And So we started back out 21, full bore. As most of you know, we had John Lindsay and I got together. We do our weekly show, and we got ourselves together kind of with our seasons. But I started back early developing seasonings, and I actually had just my rib rub is the only one I had out because obviously that's what we used on ribs and pork. And as it evolved, I really wanted a brisket, something to use on brisket. I worked on that for a year or so and came up with my bovine delight. Those were actually the first two rubs that I had. 2019, when we really got into steak, I really wanted something that was a little bit different than anything out there. I started in about February, I guess, of 19, working on my Climax AP, which is the centerpiece of my seasoning right now, to be honest with you. I worked on it through July, got disgusted because I couldn't get it the way I wanted it, and I just laid it down. I picked it back up in September, working with my bottler. We came down to about probably 4 different samples, and I tried. I actually decided upon one, and then we released it really just as a first test batch in December, and then we went to the shed in January of 20. Myself and Brian and Leanne Caruso was using the Climax, which won both steak A and B at the shed last year. So that was kind of my journey with that. The 38 Special, which is my steak that I guess my steak seasoning that I developed that actually adds some color and a little more salt and a little kick of pepper. And you guys have heard us talk about it. It's about layering flavors. It's about layering the flavors. We're a really big supporter of that because that's what we do. When John and I got together, it was just amazing how well our seasonings blended together. You take his steak shake, you take his big red beef for color, you take those and blend those together in any formats you want to put them together, and they work really, really well. So I've also last year released my barbecue sauces, which is Sweet Southern Shine. It is a very unique barbecue sauce that's really catching on out there now. So that's kind of the history of where we are with Hotty Toddy.
Well, there you have it, folks. Podcast over. He laid it all out for us. Simple, done.
Well, I mean, if you haven't heard of Hotty Toddy yet,
right.
I don't know. You guys need to get out way more. 1, 2, if you haven't tried it, get it right now. This very instant, you will not be sorry.
Yeah, press pause on the podcast. You can come back to us, but order it now.
I remember you had a stocking problem, and I was like, I had 8 of them, and I was like, hold on a sec, because it blew up. Now you didn't have a stocking problem; it blew up, and you weren't able to. He was like, oh, okay, that's what I assume anyway. And so, and I was thinking about how people will buy PlayStations, and then sell them for $500 more. I was like, I got some Hotty Toddy, dude, just $70. That's it. Just one bottle for $70. I didn't do it, but I could have.
So, can you guys, between you and John, can you figure it out? Who was the first one to win with the Arcasipi combo between yours and John's rubs? Because obviously 90% of the SCA cooks are using that combo with something else, but where's the foundation? Where did that start winning at and when?
I was thinking about that. We really have never put that, those, 2 and 2 together on that, to be honest with you. We have, I was trying to think back. I believe we started our Arcasipi Smoke Live, I guess, in March. I'm going to think it was toward probably April, May. And I think it was either me or John. I'm not sure which one. I won it by Byhalia, and then at Nesbitt, Mississippi. And I think that's kind of where that Arcasipi combo, kind of got started. And we get hundreds of questions about, okay, just tell me exactly. Well, there's nothing exactly about it. I mean, it's, some people use it. I use it different than John does. Other people use it different. They add other stuff to it. That's a great thing about our products. It blends well with a lot of other products, and we promote that. Some people don't want you to use anything but theirs, but that's not our philosophy. Our philosophy is that, hey, ours goes with just about anything. And when you're layering the flavors, we want to be one of those layers. It's successful for us. We've just had a ton of support, people using it. So as you alluded to, and we're so thankful and humbled every day for that.
Right. So as you know, Rusty, from other podcasts, that I use 6 rubs. AJ and I use 6. Well, I just added 7 to the arsenal. I literally got my Hotty Toddy yesterday. So,
for the first time?
Yeah. Yeah. So so we're going 7 layers this year, AJ and I.
7 layers, like a bean dip.
Yeah, there you go. It's gonna be perfect. It's gonna have the perfect. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, 8 including the steak.
So where did that come about, though? I mean, let's talk about what is Arcasippy combo. What is the Arcasippy combo? I don't if there are people who don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, John is the Arkansas side of that, and I'm the Mississippi side of that. And actually, when the Arcasippy concept came together back in probably February of last year, when we had decided to, we were right in the very beginning stages of COVID. Everybody was at home. I was working, traveling, and we decided we actually was going to set out to do YouTube videos first. And then, everything kind of shut down, and we decided that we were going to do a Facebook Live show. And we decided, okay, what are we going to name it? So I'm thinking of all these things that we could put together. And then I thought, hey, what about Arcasippy Smoke Live? So I called John. It was on a Friday evening, and he's like, man, I love it. And I said, we could do a logo with the states kind of combined there. And that's where the Arcasippy concept really started. And then obviously when us and others started combining the Hotty Toddy products and the All Queued Up products, it became known as the Arcasippy combo. And like I said before, we get messages weekly wanting to know exactly what is that Arcasippy combo. Well, with me, it's my Climax, my bovine, my 38 special, John's Big Red Beef. I love the color and the beefiness of that rub, and just some of his the steak shake. That's my combo. Now, how I use that is totally different than how John uses it and others. And so what our goal is what we tell everyone: take it and make it your own. But layering those flavors, I mean, obviously you want the one that provides the color to be on the top side, and I want a lot of that flavor punch to be on bottom. And there's obvious reasons for that. And I don't want all of it caked up on the top side, because it's going to compromise your presentation and the way it looks. And so that's kind of how that came together. And we've just that's just kind of blown up, for us over the last 6 months, 8 months, I guess. And it's amazing how those, I mean, it was almost like we were sitting in a room together when we tried to put all these seasons together. You put one with the other, and neither overpowers the other.
So what does that process for you look like? Okay, so here's the thing. I haven't cooked an SCA for a minute, and we're about to head down to Simi Valley, California. Next, 2
weeks.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I haven't practiced steak in a really long time.
You better start now.
Tell someone like me who hasn't been in the game for a few months, which is a long time in the barbecue world. Trust me. You may think, it's only been a few months, but man, that rust settles quick. Or someone who's just starting out in steak, what's something you can tell them to work on when they're starting out cooking steak or getting back into things?
Well, first of all, as John has said many times, control what you can control. And my rule of thumb, it will always be have fun and cook a steak. Now, those are two very easy, very, very, very simple things to say. But, going back to what I said with control what you can control, okay? You can trim your steak up to where it looks presentable. You can make that look as good as you want to. But the doneness and the taste are things that you can control. Now, when I say that, doneness, and another thing we always say, so goes the doneness, so goes the steak. You eat with your eyes before you ever take a bite. If that steak is well under, then obviously you know that your doneness is going to suffer. You know your overall is going to suffer, and probably your texture is going to suffer. So I know real quick that if I hit doneness, I've got a chance. If I miss doneness, more than likely, you can fudge a little on taste, you can fudge a little on appearance, but if that doneness is off, you can bet your overall impression is going to be off. That's 2 out of the 5. And 2 out of the 5 is not going to get you called in today's world of steak competitions, that's for sure.
And so how do you do like tenderness? So you looking, what's your target temperature to pull that thing off and let it settle? Are you it's like, I'm going to put it right in a box and send it out? Or am I going to pull it a certain degree and let it rest?
Well, that's one thing that everyone's looking for, that magic number. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's no magic number for doneness. It depends on the thickness of the steak. It depends on the quality of the meat. You can take a steak that's less than an inch and you cook it to the same temperature that you cook one that's an inch and a quarter, inch and 3/8 even, and you're going to see the difference in the doneness. Obviously, that thinner steak is going to get hotter quicker, and it's that inside is going to be a warm pink center quicker at a lower temperature than this one over here that's going to be an inch and 3/8. So thickness of the steak matters, and that's why we say always depend on your practice steak. Always let your practice steak be your guide. Cook it to what you think I don't know what your type steak you like to cook. Of course, I'm a big tri-heart guy. I live or die by the tri-heart. And obviously a tri-heart is going to be about 3 to 4 degrees difference than a wraparound spinalis. In other words, one of those that's coming from the middle of the loin. That tri-heart coming from the chuck end of the loin. And it's going to have more marbling. You've got 3 muscles there, the spinalis major, the minor, and the loin, where with the ones in the middle, you're going to have that spinalis and then the loin. And so there's a lot of factors that goes into that. That's why I keep saying that, make sure to let your practice steak be your guide. Obviously, you want to try to get a steak as close as to your, the one you're going to turn in as possible. Sometimes that don't work, but knowing that there's about 3 to 4 degrees difference, that's going to get you in the ballpark.
Right. So,
and just to give you an idea, I won a contest with a tri-heart that I cooked to 150 degrees. It finished at 150 degrees.
Oh, wow.
And it was about an inch. It was a little over an inch and a half.
Right.
Sure did.
That's crazy. So I just have a question. Just when we're coming to steak selection, you've just said you cooked 60 competitions. That's 60 steak selections that you've gone through in a season. And I'm pretty sure between each competition, SCA is everybody's supposed to pick a choice steak, but obviously that's not going to happen. You'll get some true choice, if not select steaks out there on the road. And then sometimes you'll get some choice more towards the prime side. How do you tweak your cook to something like that? So your prime side is probably, you're going to want to get a little bit higher temperature to render that fat out. But your select side, you want to kind of, get it to where you almost ballpark it. How do you make that adjustment on the road for somebody who's like Rusty, who's deciding to go on the road and he's going to get different cuts of meats and not consistent cuts on the road?
That was a great question.
Well, the SCA has rules for promoters to go by. And obviously, sometimes there's promoters out there that don't heed the recommendations of SCA. Ken Phillips and Brick Galloway has done an excellent job putting this sanctioning body together. Every day, every time I go to a contest, I think about, how on earth did these guys come this far with this? And they have some very good guidelines for a promoter to go by. Now, if they choose to go by that, they're going to find either a choice or better with at least an inch and an eighth steak. Now, obviously that didn't happen that way every time, and you have to adjust to different steaks. Now, after you've cooked, 60 plus contests, you pretty much can look at a steak and say, that's an upper choice, or that's almost bordering a prime. And, there's been things out there that, especially during COVID, when there were some beef shortages and stuff like that, we heard rumors of choice steaks getting stamped as prime and vice versa and so forth, so on. So how I approach that is basically, like I said before, I'm going to cook a practice steak an hour and 15 minutes probably before the turn-in time. And that gives me an idea of how I'm going to adjust my temperatures. Now, the carryover temperature is something also, obviously a steak is going to carry over unless it's 20 degrees with a north wind. But there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that you're within that ballpark. In other words, if your practice steak, you take it off at 135, let's say, and you make sure your grill grates are the same temperature when you put that steak on, you make sure it's in surroundings of the same, and that steak goes up 7 degrees. Well, that gives you an idea of what happens. Now, I always back mine up a little bit to give me some room for error or whatever. Some people don't like to put a steak back on, but if my steak don't get to the temperature I want it to be, I'll put it back on. I have been known to put steaks back on 3 times to get to the temperature I want.
Interesting.
So don't compromise. If you don't hit your mark, put it back on. Maybe let it go up just 1 degree and then take it back off. See if it goes up. If it don't, put it back on for another 1 degree until it gets to the temperature you want it to be.
That's great. I've never even thought about that. Like, I think once it's off, I'm like, I don't want to put it back on again. I don't want to touch it. At least it is what it is.
What about going the opposite direction? It's screaming and it's climbing. Do you just throw it in a bag and throw it on some ice real quick, or?
Yeah, I mean that's all you can do. I mean, I have done that before with a steak that I knew was shooting up too fast, especially in the summertime. That happens more in the summertime because if it's 90 plus degrees out there. Okay. I have set my rack on my steak right on top of a fan, to try to slow it down. I've put it in the cooler before. Now that's when it becomes nerve wracking, when it's headed above where you want it, and you're trying to stop it. It's easier to start below just a little bit and itch up than it is to go well over. Because once it goes well over, obviously you're done.
Or you can just be like you and turn in a 150-degree steak.
Right? That's awesome.
But I learned this on the podcast. I'm taking it to 150.
Right? I could never win. So so when you put the steak on, do you have a certain a certain temperature you're looking for to get it on? Because I'm hearing, I know 65 degrees. I'm hearing 90 degrees sometimes. Is there, how do you feel about pre-temperatures of steak?
Well, the cooler or colder the steak is when you put it on the grill, the more it's going to carry over. And when I say carry over, I mean it's going to continue to rise. That's what happens a lot of times, especially in the summertime. Now, the wintertime, it will stabilize a little bit. But for me, with my style of cooking, I want a steak to be 65 to 70 degrees. And, I've had people say, well, look, we live in Wisconsin and Michigan. How on earth are we going to get a steak to 65 to 70 degrees? And I'm like, well, you come in your vehicle, right? It's got a heater, right? Put it in a pan, put it in the floorboard, turn your heater wide open. You'll get it up to 65 to 70 degrees in a hurry. And obviously there's, with trailers that most everybody has now, you can have just a toaster oven to sit it on top of, or, whatever. I typically, in this time of year, I don't ever put my steaks back in the cooler, even if it's a double. I'll have my heat on in my trailer and I'll just leave it sitting out. I'll put a paper towel or something over it just to keep the air from, blowing on it. But 65 to 70 is my comfort zone. Now, I know people that are taking those steaks to 80, 90 degrees, which is going to shorten their cook, obviously, and it's going to shorten their carryover. And I know that don't make a lot of sense, but when you think about it, that 80, 90 degree steak is not going to be on that fire as long as my 65 to 70. So obviously it's not going to carry over as much.
That's interesting. That's interesting too. I have tried the very, hot steak, but like you said, it was done pretty quickly, not as fast as it cooks.
But tell us about your experience when you try to push it hot. What did you 2-turn it, 3-turn it, 4-turn it?
I 4-turned it, but I adjusted in my head. So I usually will have it on top, when it's all done on the 4-flip, I'll put it up for about, I don't know, however long it takes. Right. But I'm 130 each side. And so I was able to get my 130 each side on the 4th, and on the top, I was able to get to the temperature a lot quicker, a lot faster. So
it's good. And then you're actually probably helps too. You're not pulling as much heat off those grill grates either. So you can,
Mm-hmm. It was nice. Yeah. And I felt like, like I said, I've only tried a couple of times, but I felt like that it was just a little bit more tender, which could be a bad thing sometimes. It doesn't, it's maybe too tender. Maybe they're getting to it and they mistake it for being mushy,
right?
Yeah.
So that's another option. But, so are you seasoning right away after that 65, or are you waiting? Is there a season period that you like to go for?
I like to season mine typically about an hour and a half if I have that much time. Of course, on a Friday night cook, you typically don't have that long. Now, if it's a double, I won't season both my steaks. I'll season my steak A, and then about the time I'm going to put my steak A on to cook, I'll season my steak B, because then there's typically going to be about an hour and a half in between those by the time, because it usually takes me anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes to cook a steak the way I cook a steak. And I just, right before I go out to cook my steak A, I'll go ahead and season my steak B. But I don't season because I don't like to leave that on there. If you season both at one time, my steak B would probably be sitting there for 2.5, 3 hours. And I don't like for it to sit on that long.
And then, so how are you doing that? Are you keeping it pretty traditional? Like, just even sprinkles and then just letting the moisture pull into it and then adding another one? Are you doing all your rubs at once? How are you layering and working that process?
I use my Climax AP and John's steak shake kind of as my base, and I'll let that sit there for 5 or 10 minutes and let it draw the moisture, kind of let that work, and then I go back and then I apply my John's Big Red Beef for color on top side, and that's basically all I want to do, that top side. If it's a thicker steak, obviously I'm going to put more layers on there, or more off layers on there, except for the color. Obviously the color is the color regardless. But if it's a thicker steak, 1.25 inches, somewhere in that vicinity, I'm going to put a little more on there. I always go back with my climax as a finishing dust, because if you cook a steak for 30 minutes, you do your butter splash, with your weights on it, all of that, you're gonna compromise some of your flavor. And I always go back. I had my climax actually made to be a very fine ground, as you can see that you put it on the steak, you turn around for 5 or 10 minutes, turn around, you can't hardly tell there's anything on there. So I wanted it to do that, and for 2 reasons: as the base, and then as a finishing dust, because the finer that it's ground, the more you're going to be able to apply it and it soak into the steak, rather than this big grit on top when the judges try to eat it.
Right. So I don't know if I should say this, but my son doesn't listen to the podcast, so I think we're okay. Oh, so I have a 15-year-old son. He kicks both of our asses on a regular basis, kind of at SCA. But I try to tell him, I was like, hey, do some, put your rub on evenly, and most of us are going to do that. My son is completely opposite. He puts it on and he massages that sucker. Like, he's like, it's called a rub. So he's rubbing it. Oh, yeah. And it looks like it's been sanded by the time he's done.
I think that's a parenting mistake, because but
the thing is,
but you teach a kid how to walk, how to eat, how to brush their teeth, and then what a rub is. That's the 4 things of fatherhood.
Right. But the thing is he's kicking both of our asses rusty. So, but it's just one of those things. Like, does it really matter if you do it in layers, or do you get more success mixing the layers up? Who knows?
Right. But I guess that's just how you want to do it. And again, it depends on the kind of rubs you use.
Yep.
But
my philosophy on that is, and I know people that will take a teaspoon of this, teaspoon of this, teaspoon of this, and mix it all together. My philosophy on that is that, I know all the ingredients in the bottle is supposed to be the same. However, you can shake it. If you've got coarse ground black pepper, let's say, all of that over time, and just it's sitting there on a counter for 10 minutes, all of that's going to be kind of on one side. So are you going to guarantee that you're going to get, all of it? Now, that's my philosophy. It's not been proven scientifically or anything, but I found the layers of flavor, and I actually learned that back in the barbecue days. I mean, we layered flavors in barbecue. I mean, we used 3 different rubs on ribs, chicken, pull the skin back, put some, the base on the meat, and then the other on top for color, and then some on bottom, and same thing with the butts and briskets, and so that's where I became that philosophy of the layering of flavors, that it's not just about one, or mixing them together, which, like I said, some people do that and they're successful. My philosophy has always been layering, and that's kind of what we roll with.
Right. And then you can also change the flavor of just a single rub by grinding it. It completely changes. Like if you want to make a finishing dust and you grind it, it's going to taste a lot different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is.
I finishing dust everything. I put finishing dust on my Cheerios.
Nice.
I grind up Cheerios.
Hotty Toddy?
With some Hotty Toddy. Sprinkle that stuff on. I'm telling you guys right now, don't knock until you try a Hotty Toddy on your Cheerios is where it's at. The breakfast of champions, they call it, where I come from.
Next time you eat that, I want to see a tag on that. I want to tag all of us.
I don't know. You might work out. So we go from that to letting the things, the layers and the setting and all that stuff. and to the cook. Is there specific things that you look for when you cook? Because you use, I want to say it's M grills, but it's an M16, right? Is what you're cooking on?
M16. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Cooker.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yep.
So is there something you look for? Because I know John has a certain way with his. Is there, what kind of specifics to a cooker do you look for when you're cooking for someone who's looking to practice at home? Maybe a couple tips you can give them on the cooker itself.
You know, I did something that a lot of people told me that I shouldn't do. You know, I've been talking to Travis with M Grills since really after the shed. And, of course, COVID hit. We had a delay in getting grills out and so forth. And he got me my M Grill just, I guess, the last of June. And we had already cooked a few contests. And a lot of people said, you crazy for changing grills in the middle of the year. As well as you started out, don't do it. But you know, I practiced on this M Grill twice, and I have a little different technique of how I use the grill. I don't use a full set of grill grates on top of that grill, on top of the fire. I only use two panels together. It allows me to move them back and forth. A lot of grills don't give you that option. A lot of grills that, you know, there's no way you can move it without worrying about it falling off. This one fits right. The grill grates fits right in. And then I automatically, when I put my Royal Oak charcoal right at the end on the left side, I can move that grill grate as close as I want it to get that desired temperature. And then when I want to finish my steak, all I got to do is push it down to the other end where there's no fire. First time I cooked on my M16 was in Byhalia, Mississippi, at Mark Lambert's event. I did carry my other grill with me. I cooked 2 practice steaks on it. I loved it. I cooked my practice steak on the M Grill, and I said, I'm all in, win, lose, or draw. And I won the contest, first contest that I had ever cooked on that M Grill. It is so much easier to manage your fire. It takes less charcoal because that thing is a beast. I mean, if you don't believe that, just try loading one by yourself without the cart.
True that.
And once it gets hot, it's hot. And you got all your vents right there, you know, in front of you, 2 on each side, 2 on bottom, 2 on top. You have to move them very little to adjust the heat. I just love the way it cooks. Just love the way it cooks.
I love the 2. I use the 2 thing too. And the biggest reason is because same the way you do is I like to have the 2 zone. So I'm able to push everything under those 2. But at the same time, I do a practice steak and then I have another set that I can just put on and I don't have to clean, you know? So I can just, it's like, boom, and then set that one aside and then get the new fresh one on and get it heated up. So another thing you can do using cookers. But yeah, the M Grill's great. A buddy of mine, Sterling, has one, and Kyle, and they love them. But Royal Oak charcoal, fellow Royal Oaker there. So you use the naturals of Royal Oak. Do you use wood, or you just kind of, you know what, I'm using charcoal. That's my flavor.
I use straight charcoal and grilling. You know, obviously if I'm smoking, I'm going to use hickory wood. According to what I'm cooking, you know, definitely ribs. I'm going to throw some cherry on there for color. Pork, same thing. I may throw a little apple in there, but grilling, I go straight charcoal.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I don't know. I wanted to go away from that because some of the smoke I get, I don't know if I like the flavors with it too much. I just like the old school, you know, just throw it on the grill and that good taste of the charcoal and that's it. So that's good. And so we talked about, we'll not get into the process of the cook and then all that stuff. So what do you think so tenderness is really important, but when you're looking for your presentation part of things, what are a few tips people can have? Because I feel like tenderness is hard, but that's something you have to practice, right? You have to look for that in your cooker. That's getting to know a lot of different aspects of it. The taste is how are you going to put your rub on it? How are you going to layer it? All that stuff. Presentation, though, That's kind of a mean one, because you can put a steak on, it looks absolutely beautiful, and all of a sudden this like rogue fat thing pops up and now you have a mushroom in it, or
it curls,
or you know,
the fat separates, and
the fat separates, or you have a mushroom, you know, thing where you tied it. What are a couple tips you can give people about presentation of steaks?
Well, one of the things about presentation, you mentioned the fat that bubbles up, that, you know, that looks, you know, ugly. What I do and what most cooks do is, if you have a huge fat pocket, just really concave that out. It doesn't hurt you at all. I mean, you want to leave it in there enough, you know, that it continues to bind the meat together. But I'll hull it out, you know, almost, you know, all of it, almost not all the way through, obviously. And then I just approach it kind of the natural contour of the loin. You know, I don't like to trim my steak round, because then it doesn't, to me, look like a steak. I try to keep it in the contour of what the loin is already there. In other words, if it's got the tail on it, I'm going to come right around the loin and cut that tail off. I'm not going to be aggressive with that. And I like to actually put a little slant in mine. When I say slant, if I've got my steak looking at me on the presentation side, I always like to cut just a little bit on the ends of the presentation end. That keeps you from having one that, you know, comes out on the side. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
After you put it down, you know, you've got more. It looks like you got more steak on the bottom than you do the top.
Right.
Okay. So that eliminates that. And then take it back to brisket. You know, when you're cooking a brisket, you always trim the edges. Why do you trim the edges? Because you don't want those jagged parts sticking out after it's cooked. Well, I do the same thing with a steak. You know, I'll take the edge, just kind of round the edge off with scissors. And that's, you know, that's basically all you. I mean, those are one of those things that you can indirectly control. Now, just remember, the presentation is going to be, you know, if the steak is facing you and you put the spinalis at the opening of the box, the open part of the box here when it's facing you, the hinge is going to be behind you. The loin part, the presentation part, is going to be pointed towards the hinge of the box. They're going to cut that steak in half. Those judges don't see that steak whole. So whatever that steak looks like up here where they're going to eat it doesn't matter, really, because all they're going to be judging you on is that bottom half. So focus on that bottom part, making sure that, number one, you don't have a lot of rubs that can burn or you know, compromise the look of your grill grates if you're using grill marks. Because, you know, there's no rule that says you have to have grill marks. But if they're going to be on there, they need to be consistent, and they need to be continuous and come on, look good. So those are things you can do for presentation. Now, obviously, with presentation is that you don't trim off all the fat that's connecting your spinalis if it's a wraparound spinalis, because then it may, you know, your steak's going to come apart. Because you can tie it. We tie the steaks. I put toothpicks in mine to really, I really put them in there to help me align the string. I kind of lace it around on top, bottom of the toothpicks just to keep that string in place. And to your question on the mushrooming, I've had that to happen. But I learned that, you know, in the final stages there of your steak coming up to temp, I put my weight on top of it, which will actually help you with presentation. And that keeps that steak from mushrooming up. Now, tying the string too tight obviously will allow that steak to cook and start coming up in the middle. So make sure you don't tie your string too tight. That's the first rule of thumb on that.
And the string is just to hold the shape. It's not to actually keep the meat together. Just as you remember that as you're tying your steak, it's just to hold shape, not to keep it together.
Unless you're like me and you're like a samurai and you just chop the heck out of your steak and you need it to keep together because because you just can't stop yourself because you overthink every steak and you're just cutting and cutting and cutting and then you're spinning all this is half off.
Yeah, like the wagon wheel concept.
That's me. Steak weights. I've heard anything from 11 ounces to a brick. Where you stand?
Mine is usually from 12. I think mine's about 12, 13 ounces. I use it's more the aluminum type. I don't use a heavy cast iron. And I do that. Like I said, I press my steak with my hand to set the grill grates. I don't want them to be charred. I want them to be dark, obviously, but I don't want them to be charred. And I don't want that weight to be enough that it's gonna make an indentation to where, you can't hardly see the grill grates because they're so deep in the meat. Like I said, I use a lightweight weight. A lot of people use the heavy and they do well with it. And it goes along with your technique. That's my approach to it. That's kind of my technique with it and my thinking on it.
Okay. You work really hard to get those grill marks. How do you keep from washing them away when you go to the butter?
That was my next question. Because that happens to me all the
time. I don't brush the butter on. And I don't put a lot of butter. I just got the little silicone brushes like we used in barbecue. And I'll just, dip it in my butter, shake it, and then I kind of pat over the top of my steak. I don't brush it. And I've seen some people brush it and do well with it. And I've seen people brush it that they took half their grill marks off. So it's all about how set your grill marks are, and are they susceptible to a brush that would compromise their look. And I just pat my butter on, and I really do that for the look of the steak. It shines, and then I also have a little flavor in my butter that I put a little more on the top. I'm on the spinalis end that the judge is going to eat.
And what is that?
I'll tell you, I use I use clarified butter. I use the ghee is what I use. I could tell you that. I use it for. It just serves better and it mixes better with, especially if you're gonna put a little seasoning in there with it. You definitely don't want to get it too hot because it'll scorch real quick. Mm-hmm. But I like the shine of it better than just regular butter. And I've tried it all. Believe me, I've tried it all.
And are you a duck fat on the grates, or are you what are you putting on those to make it some not sticking?
I don't spray my grates at all. And I've found out by not doing that, you're able to keep your grill grates cleaner, and because what I was doing was caking up spray down in the valleys, and over time, I don't care how much you brush it, it's going to come to the point that it's there, almost like concrete. I never spray my grates. I that back last year sometime. All I do, I spray my steak with duck fat. And then I actually use avocado oil and spray a paper towel and just wipe over the top of my grill grates right before I put my steak on. Because that's really all you want anyway. You just want the top of those grates. You don't want it all down in the valley. And I just don't. They're much easier to clean. Take a brush afterwards, 10 minutes, and they're ready to go again.
And so on your guys' show, you talk to judges sometimes. What is a couple things you've learned from judges that kind of opened your eyes that had maybe changed the way you cook, or you can impart to others about what they're maybe not seeing in the back room when everyone's eating your steak?
Well, one of the big things that I learned from talking to judges, and when I took the judging class, and I would urge anyone out there that wants to cook SCA, go take a judging class. it really gives you the perspective of how your steak is going to be treated once you turn it in. What happens? How quick that goes. And one of the things, there's two things that I learned. One, tenderness is not 100% of texture. You know, we're judged on texture, not tenderness. Tenderness is a part of texture, but tenderness is not 100% of texture. Now, what are you talking about? Okay. So they're cutting that steak with a plastic knife. Okay. They're not cutting it with a steak knife like we have at home. So if it cuts clean, more than likely you're going to get a better texture score than you would if they start to cut it and it tears. Even though that may be really tender, you may have one of the tenderest steaks you've ever cooked in your life and get killed in texture.
Interesting.
Because just remember that they're cutting with a plastic knife. And that helped me more than anything because I was over tenderizing a steak. Because in my mind, cooking a steak at home, I want it to be tender. I'm not worried about the texture. I want it to be tender. But tenderness is not 100% of texture. And then when you look at, the other part, if we're eating a steak at home, I'm going to cut a good chunk of that steak to eat. Okay. These judges are cutting a piece with a plastic knife that's about the size of your thumbnail. So you're gonna have to pack all, just like ribs, just like barbecue. Those judges are gonna take one bite of that rib. You want every bit of flavor you can get on that bite. Same thing with a steak, except it's about the size of your thumbnail. And I have been at comps. They have my friends there, and they'd see how much seasoning I put on that steak, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's going to be so salty you can't eat it." And I was like, "Well, just wait and see." A smaller bite, obviously, you're not going to get as much seasoning as you would with a bigger bite. So you got to pack all the flavor you can for them to take one bite of your steak that's about the size of your thumbnail. Those are the two things that helped me when I took the judging class and talking to judges about that. The biggest thing being tenderization. I was over tenderizing steaks because I thought in my mind, tenderization or tender, the tenderness of the steak was 100% of texture, but it's not.
That's really hard to learn when you're looking at that score sheet as a beginner. Like, what is the difference? You know what I mean? Like, it can go either way, or you can hit both of them and you're still confused on what you did.
Yeah.
So,
and it's the chew, a mushy, and we've all ate a mushy steak. Now, if we're out here at home, I want that steak to fall apart. I like that, but it's the chew. If obviously if it's not tender, then it's not going to be. It's kind of like the rib, when we were trying to achieve that bite through where you could see the bone and the meat didn't pull away. There was a fine line there, and it's similar to what that concept is that you're trying to get a tender steak that's not mushy, that you can still cut with a plastic knife without tearing it apart. If that makes sense.
It totally does. And I think that's kind of where I'm getting it wrong on tenderness, is because that's what I think. I think I want a tender steak where, and then I, looking at it like, oh, wow, they're cutting through the plastic knife and it's mushy. That's tender, that's not necessarily it. Maybe, I learned something right there.
And I'll tell you a tip. I'll give you a tip. My tip on texture is that with my gloves on, obviously, I put my two fingers on that spinalis that I know the judge is going to eat. I'm not worried about the loin because they're not going to eat it. I put my two fingers on there. If my fingerprints stay there, I don't touch that steak as far as tenderization. Now, if I look back and my fingerprints are gone, I'm going to do something to it because that tells me that it's got a firm texture. And if you can't push it, and I don't push it with a lot of force. I just lay my fingers on it. And if my fingerprint stays in there, I don't do anything to tenderize that steak.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's way good. Thank you for that.
Yep, great tip.
Great tip. Because I'm a jacarta no matter what. So when you do tenderize it, I see some people are tenderizing the whole steak. Some are just doing the loin part with the spinalis. Are you tenderizing the whole steak, or do you not worry about that back half?
I don't worry about the back half. I do tenderize half the steak, and I figure out, and I know how I'm going to lay it in the box, because sometimes you want to lay it to where they can get the best bites. Now, anything in that top half is open range from the eat. So if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to always do the spinalis, for sure, because obviously that's what they're going to be eating. And I base that on, how I turn my steak in the box to figure out where that cut line is going to be. And then anything above that cut line is, open season for them to eat.
Mm. Yeah, that's kind of what I stopped doing too. I'm like, what am I doing back here? Right? There's no point in that. They're just going to,
Now you're just making the whole thing weak.
Yeah.
Taking a judging class, you mentioned, is a really important part, I think, of a beginner cook. Because you got to understand what they're looking for. Like, I went to California, and I'm telling you that I know everyone says flavor profiles don't matter in regions, but man, there's something going on in California. So excuse me. So what other tip would you give someone in closing here, from someone just starting out, not taking a class? What is the most important thing you've learned, do you think, looking back on everything now? What would you have told yourself in 2018 when you were first starting with the steaks?
Practice on your technique. We talked about that doneness scenario where, you may practice at home with a certain kind of steak, and you get there Saturday morning, they're totally different. So your practice is out the door, unless without your technique. I practice to make sure my technique is where I want it. I get my technique down, and then I worry about what I'm going to do with that steak on Saturday morning. Technique is very important. Doing the same thing the same way, every time. And practice is the only thing that's going to get you there. There's a lot of classes out there now. My buddy John's got the one on Q Champs Academy. That'll cut your learning curve down tremendously by watching that class. There's a lot of people out there doing classes. There's a lot of people out there doing, one-on-ones. And, you can shorten your curve if you want. If you don't have that available or the chance to do that, then practice. That's exactly what I did. And looking back on it, I wished I had really honed in on my techniques instead of worrying about a doneness score a doneness temperature that doesn't exist, and it may change on Saturday morning. That's what I've learned more than anything, is make sure to practice your techniques. And ask other people, hey, this SCA family, that's what I love about it. You guys know, the barbecue world, John, Lindsay and I, we've cooked barbecue against each other probably 4 or 5 years and never met. We met at a steak contest. And I dare say that anybody you go ask during a steak competition, they'll help you out. They'll get you in the ballpark. And that's where you need to be, in the ballpark. Then you got to hone the rest of it yourself.
And if you're going to do that, guys, make sure it's a contest where I'm cooking in the same contest with Ronald and John, and make sure you're asking them right when they're starting to cook. Like, really ask those questions.
Yeah, trying to set you up, man.
This is how I win. I sabotage. I can't cook. I got to sabotage. That's how I do it. So where can people find you, Ronald?
Well, I'm on Facebook, my personal page. I'm on Instagram. It's Toddy Barbecue. Hotty BBQ.com. Of course, John and I have our Arcasipi Smoke Live YouTube videos that are coming out. We just released our second episode of the Kids Pork Chop. We've got our own Arcasipi Facebook page. Reach out to me there. Anything I can do to help to move this sport forward. That's exactly what John and I try to do every Monday night. we love this sport. We love the people. We love our SCA family. And kudos to Ken Phillips and Brett Galloway and all the judges, the reps. I mean, it's one big happy family, and we love it.
Well, we appreciate you coming on here. We're big fans of yours. I tell you, Hotty Toddy, I've been there since day one. So been a fan since day one. You can check that out every Monday, guys. I'm telling you, go watch their show every Monday night. You can learn something every single time. There's a little nugget in there, maybe several. So we appreciate it, and continue to be a good ambassador for the SCA and steak and cooking and just general getting along and goodness. And we appreciate everything and your time specifically. And hopefully we talk to you again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right. See you later.
Bye-bye. All right, guys. That was Ronald Burns there.